Now, I look around at this civilization that we've built in the last century and a half on this continent. And it's kind of what happened on this continent here has kind of led the world to follow in our footsteps. And we've seen the kind of industrial civilization, industrial-based civilization. It took roots in North America and found its first really full expression in America. And now we see it's encompassing the world. Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Squaring the Circle, where we are going to literally try to figure out how to square the circle, which, of course, we know we will never do within this segment of the space-time continuum. But somewhere out there in some alternative dimension, it is probably possible to actually square the circle with mathematical precision. But we are just looking for something nice and precise. We know that it won't be mathematically perfect, but when you're out in the field and you're working in the field, you know that you have this little margin of error. And you stay within that margin of error, and you're going to be successful in whatever you're trying to accomplish. So what am I rambling about? Well, anyways, we're going to be talking about some things related to sacred geometry in this episode and some of its applications. We'll look at a few things and consider some basic ideas, some foundational ideas to the whole system of sacred geometry and what it means. So I actually have a guest with me here, or he's not here with me. He's actually in another city, and in fact in another state. But we are friends and colleagues and both brothers of the craft, and I've been friends now since going on, I think, about 3 years now anyway. We've done several conferences and organized a well-attended workshop in Nashville. He'll remind me what year that was. I mean, it was recently, and very well attended, and it was a lot of fun, a lot of success. If you take a golden rectangle, artists know this, a golden rectangle, a well-proportioned face will fit right in a golden rectangle. Let's see, I usually like to get a volunteer to just show some examples. Well, what I need is the most perfectly proportioned person here to volunteer. Warren? Warren! Anyways, he's going to be joining me, and we're going to be talking about geometric-related things and symbolism and other things like that have to do with understanding a little bit better, how the world works. So I'm going to call him in right now. Warren Steury, come forth.
How's it going? Great to talk to you again.
Well,
we talk pretty frequently, but it's good to be on another episode of the podcast.
Well, thank you, Warren. I guess, and you hosted an event for me in Nashville. What was the name of the lodge? We were in one of the Masonic lodges there in downtown Nashville.
Yeah, 2 years ago. Yeah, West Nashville Phoenix over in West Nashville. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was a great event. And awesome. in the promo for this one, I think that we have a photograph that was taken from that event, and that was really, really great. I mean, I've continued to get good feedback about that.
Yeah, that was awesome. I mean, we spent 2 days learning about sacred geometry, and then we got to go to the Parthenon and see how everything we just learned looks when it's actually put into practice.
We learned this morning in our sacred geometry class how the facade of the Parthenon is perfectly framed in a golden rectangle.
Like, what a great way to like see what you just took into your brain in reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was what made that particular weekend special, is because we could cap the instruction, the hours of instruction, going through the process and learning, for example, about the golden rectangle, and then going and seeing the Parthenon, which is an authentic reproduction with all of the original dimensions preserved within the
Yeah.
building there.
The only one-to-one scaled Parthenon in the world, actually. It's wild.
Well, I think we better do another event up in Nashville at some point.
It's the perfect place to do it. I mean, like Nashville has such a rich history. You know, like that Parthenon was built during the Centennial Exposition in 17, no,
18.
1897, I believe. And it was like a world fair.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's the whole conversation. Like, like we used to throw these giant festivals 6 months and build these beautiful temporary buildings,
Mm-hmm.
but we cared so much about how they looked. We cared about the beauty of the environment that we were creating, that we put more attention to detail into those temporary buildings than we do into permanent structures that we build today.
It's true.
It's a
It's
total
true.
like flip flop of mentality.
Well, we I think we need to like contrast our own society and where we've come from, where we're at now, and where we could potentially be going, and look at it in the context of other societies, maybe even societies that are only a few steps removed from us. The world that I look at America around us, and I've been to Grand Coulee Dam many times, and I stand there in awe of this tremendous engineering accomplishment there at on the Columbia River. And I know that just by this quirk of fate, the exact position of Grand Coulee Dam and why that particular spot is so conducive and so correct for this massive structure. It's a mile wide, and it's what, 400 and almost 500 feet high, 400 feet high roughly, and a mile wide, and they've actually built a large extension of it. It's an engineering marvel. At the time, it was built back in the 1930s. Now, I look around at this civilization that we've built in the last century and a half on this continent. And it's kind of what happened on this continent here has kind of led the world to follow in our footsteps. And we've seen the kind of industrial based civilization. It took roots in North America and found its first really full expression in America. And now we see it's encompassing the world, right? And we look at what has been built, and I think to myself, when I was a boy coming up, we had a president who declared we're going to go to the moon before the century's out. And for a few years, it was like the whole attention and the whole vision, enthusiasm of the country got on board with that. And as that proceeded, that was one thing that seemed to transcend the cultural divide. And there was definitely a cultural divide, like as we get into the late 60s with it manifested in its more cruder forms in, the rednecks and the construction workers versus the hippies, but it was, of course, much more nuanced than that. But there was very much a cultural divide. There were the peaceniks, and then there were those, the rah-rah patriots, that said, yeah, we got to go kick the communist ass over there. They're going to come over here. Never mind, of course, that they don't have a Navy or an Air Force, but they were going to come over here and get us, so that's why we had to go there and get them first. That was the essential logic of the Vietnam War. But now, but that, of course, wasn't the real reason. The real reason was they thought that the Gulf of Tonkin had gigantic, rich oil reserves there, and that's what they were coveting, and that's pretty much why they say we can't let the communists have that. So, anyways,
you were talking about the power of a shared vision, a shared goal.
Yes, and so it was that power of that shared vision that transcended. So you had the redneck construction workers and the hippies, a lot of them, all having this vicarious experience with the whole space program. Because when I came into the world, we had no presence in space at all. We didn't have a single satellite. First satellite went up, I was 6 years old. I was 6 years old. That was the launching of the Sputnik by the Soviet Union. I'm pretty sure it was 1957. If it was 1957, I was 6 years old. And I actually do vaguely remember that being in the news.
Wow.
But that was the dawn of the space age.
How long after that was it when they sent that monkey up into orbit? I think the Soviets did that, didn't they?
I think that was the Soviets, and that probably would have been after that. Once Sputnik went up, everybody in America, kind of panicked, said, "Oh my God," because what they're thinking, this is now Cold War. This is the middle of the Cold War, 1957, 58. We're just both of the United States and the Soviet Union. You're just testing nuclear bombs. Crazy, going on back and forth, literally hundreds of tests blowing off nuclear bombs in the atmosphere, right? That was going on. That was all peaking and happening during the 50s. People got to remember that. I think that's a very important component to understanding what was going on in the 1950s, is that's when, it was the development of the hydrogen bomb, and the hydrogen bomb just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it finally climaxed with Tsar Bomba in October of 62, when the Soviets under Khrushchev tested a bomb with a power of it was about 50 megatons. Of course, that was the biggest explosion ever that humans were ever responsible for. But the bomb itself was so big and unwieldy, it couldn't be delivered. There was no real way to deliver a bomb like that. Khrushchev just wanted to show off to the United States that, hey, look what us commies can do over here. We can, we beat you. We were the ones that sent the first satellite up, and we built the biggest bomb. Anyway, so that's in the middle of the 50s. This is going on. This major, Cold War, and thank God it stayed cold, even though on a couple of occasions it came really close to being hot. But the point is that back to the point is that the space program, and then it petered out in the early 70s. And what was one of the main reasons? Well, Nixon basically decommissioned the space program because of the huge debts, primarily the pressure of the huge debts incurred by the Vietnam War. And the printing of the money to pay for that war had fueled a massive inflation, which, ironically was inherited by Jimmy Carter and blamed upon Jimmy Carter, because Jimmy Carter became to power in 1976, the president, which was a year after the final year when the Vietnam War was finally over, when the helicopters had to fly out of Saigon with all the people and refugees, just like the helicopters flying out of Afghanistan. You could have almost replaced the newsreels of those two events. They were so interchangeable. The final hasty departure from Afghanistan after years of occupation, the final hasty departure from Vietnam after years of occupation. But what I'm getting at, and I think we need to focus on here, is that the fact that even in all the ferment of society during the 60s, there were these unifying things, and the space program was one of these unifying things. Now, when we look at the cultural divide today that's in America, and I look at, I have friends, I have people I've known for years that I don't, it's like we can't, there's just this wall there now because they're so invested in the status quo and the whole contrived narrative of our reality, cultural reality, political reality that's being disseminated through mainstream media, but that's all coming to light now, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's bad now because at least like back in the day with propaganda, it was like a poster on the wall that you walk past, and then it was like on the TV.
Mm-hmm.
But now we have our own like personal propaganda machines that we hold, 8 inches away from our faces all day, every single day.
Yeah, and it permeates so many of our
Yeah.
cultural institutions, from mainstream media through education and academia, which covers a huge part of society, through popular culture, and essentially it's all around creating a narrative of reality that, do we even want to go there for this discussion? I don't know, but I think it kind of comes back full circle to this idea of some kind of a unifying vision.
I think like a knowledge of like the story of like us as a people, the story of our society, the story of our culture is all very important. But then what's cool is like on the other end of that, because that all exists in time, right? On the other side of that coin, you have like the pursuit of things that are timeless, like a relationship with nature,
Mm-hmm.
like sacred geometry, like
Thank you.
astronomy, things like this. So I think that to be like balanced people, we should understand the story of the time that we live in. But equally as important is to develop this relationship with the transcendent, with the things that are timeless, such as sacred geometry, art, music, these things that speak to a part of our soul that is out of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we've maybe gone astray from that in society, and we need to get back to that. So I like this opportunity, like this workshop in 2 weeks, 15 days. Like this is an incredible opportunity to spend a weekend learning from you and learning about, this art form that you've essentially spent your whole life understanding. Like what a crazy opportunity to come and spend 2 days learning that from you in person. Um, it's amazing to me that there isn't one of these going on every single weekend. Like I think I don't know if people are paying attention to how cool and like priceless and valuable this experience really is, in my opinion.
Because we are literally at a crossroads in the evolution of humans, life, civilization. We are at a crossroads, and we can go two directions. And one direction leads to oblivion, and the other direction leads to glories that we can't even begin to imagine at this point. And I think the gods are abiding and choosing not to intervene, because that's the nature of how the system works. Because if we do it, we have to do it on our own. That's not to say we won't get help from time to time, but basically it's primarily up to us. And there are factions right now that would like to see us dumbed down, with the lacking the capability to think on our own, think critically, to just drink the Kool-Aid, swallow what we're being spoon-fed, and don't ask questions. This is the most important thing. But see, the success of the quest depends upon asking the right questions at the right time. Right now, what do you see? If you keep this in your mind and you watch mainstream media, you watch all the stuff that's going on, we are being discouraged from, in fact, even prohibited from asking questions. We're being presented with things and we're not supposed to question. You cannot question anything about the pandemic. You cannot question anything about the climate crisis. You can't question all of the stuff that's being presented to us on a pre-digested platter that we're supposed to eat and just go back to being. So it all comes down to asking the questions. And we need to be asking questions about everything that's happening. Back to the one thing is this idea of this unified vision.
Yeah.
And there are many times in history, in world history, where you can see a people, an entire society of people, even a civilization, going so far to realize and understand or recognize that the whole society was united in this vision, in an enterprise. You know, I had a taste of that coming up with the space program. You know, I had a taste of that where you had a whole society that for basically a decade was totally behind this thing, and it was almost miraculous that we went from Kennedy. And see, that's another thing, is that Kennedy's death almost ensured that, okay, we have to fulfill John F. Kennedy's legacy. And his vision that he gave to America was, we're going to go to the moon. He says, why are we going to do it?
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
I mean, it's a very interesting speech that he gives about us going to the moon, and we did it. We did it. Don't fall for all of the silly, easily debunked conspiracy theories. They're out there, and there's always got to be somebody that chimes in with that. But let's not go there. But the point is, where do we find such things in history? Where do we find the analogs of that in history? Now, the one most prominent to me that comes to mind is the High Gothic Middle Ages, the High Middle Ages. You know, from around the middle of the 1100s to the end of the 1200s. You had about a century and a half there where like 3 to 4 to 5 generations of people all over Europe were united in this incredible enterprise of creating these 80-some great, grand Gothic monuments.
Yeah.
You know, the likes of Chartres and Amiens and Reims and Leon and Bayeux and on and on. And at the same time, I mean, we're talking about 80 of these huge stone temples, which is what they were, which would required, you think about that, and we'll look at some slides here in a minute. I think we should look at some slides here to get an idea what we're talking about. But the stonework was just exceptional. The statuary, exceptional. Advanced engineering skill. The overlooked factor of the cathedrals is the astronomy that's built into them. The symbolism. You know, when you go to the west door of Chartres, who stands there to greet you? Melchizedek, an incredible statue of Melchizedek standing there. And what does he have in his hand? He's holding the Grail. And it's a ciborium. It's Melchizedek. He's holding the Grail. Why is Melchizedek holding the Grail? And, of course, the Grail has the top on it, so you know that there's something inside it, something precious inside it that has to be protected. See, these are mysteries, and somebody was capable of organizing, in effect, almost the whole of European society, because if they hadn't done that, this couldn't have happened. And at the same time, you've got about 500 smaller churches and abbeys being built, each of which are themselves quite amazing and quite exemplary of the level of skill. So we're presented with a bona fide mystery when we look at that whole experience. But we know also that when we look back at other places where at the same time as these people in Europe are building these great monuments, we've got this campaign of sacred architecture going on in Central America, right? The classic wave, the last great wave and outpouring of Mayan architecture with the stepped pyramids and the truncated pyramids. Chichen Itza, a prime example, right?
Yeah.
Then you go over to Indochina, and you see the last wave of the great the buildings like Angkor Wat and Angkor Thom, and these other magnificent structures with the incredible statuary and the engineering skill. Well, it's almost like, wait a second, when you look at this and you go, at this one particular time, you've got whatever is motivating these, what motivated the people in Indochina to just get so organized and so energetic and focused that they created this incredible culture with this that we see now, the remnants of which are emerging in the jungles the more we can see. Same thing in the rainforests of South America. There was a whole culture there, and it's appearing more and more like the last great wave of cultural flowering, expressing itself through sacred architecture and urban design and so on, happening at the same time. Now, the assumption is, of course, within the mainstream framework of history, that these are unrelated, that these are isolated cultural groups. You know, what was going on in South America at that time in terms of building and architecture was completely disconnected from what was going on in Europe in terms of the building and the architecture and so on. Likewise with what's going on in Indochina and the last wave of great earthwork structures in eastern woodlands of North America, and we see activity in the Chacoan culture of the Southwest. And then the culture that created the cities that are now emerging from the jungles of Central and South America, where did they go? Likewise, the Chacoan culture, where did it go? In other words, the people came and they were doing this, they built these things, they were there for a while, then it was gone. Now we know what happened to the European culture. The Little Ice Age, the climate shifted very extremely between the late 1200s and the early 1300s. The warmth of the high Middle Ages that allowed for the agricultural surpluses that fed multiple generations of European people, causing the proliferation of the European population. If you go back between the mid 500s and up to 1000, the climate itself was not conducive to the flowering of civilization. And see, here we have another interesting loop back, because the coldest year of it's considered by many paleoclimatologists who scientists who study ancient climate have looked at the last 2,000 years, and many of them who've studied this period, like the onset of what is called the Dark Ages, can actually pinpoint a single year, and that year is 536 AD. And according to some estimates, it was probably the single coldest year of the last 2,000 years. Wow. 536 AD. So as a consequence of that extreme cold, the next decade, in fact, is considered by some to have possibly been one of the coldest, if not the coldest decade of the last 2,000 years. So by 542 AD, people had become so malnourished and subjected to the famine because they weren't getting enough to eat, because the climate was collapsing. I mean, agriculture was collapsing because of the cold climate. And you have this succession, this de-evolutionary succession here. The cold climate causes agricultural restriction and collapse. People don't get enough to eat. They get weak. When they get weak, their immune systems become compromised. And then once they're in that state of compromised immune systems, now opportunistic diseases that might normally be resisted by the population at large, but because so many of the people now are malnourished, their immune systems are compromised. In any case, the what's called the Justinian plague wiped out in some places half the population of Europe in the year, I think it was 542. So this comes between 6 years, between 536 and 542. What's interesting here, in terms of the discussion we've been having, is the Battle of Camlan, where Arthur fought Mordred to the death, is usually given as 540 AD. And we know now that actual time, so there was actual mythical battle. It's attributed to Arthur. And if you look it up, you'll see it. It's usually attributed to, look up the Battle of Camlan. If you do that, you'll see, usually it's dated around 540 AD. So it turns out that you have this now perfect convergence between the story, the myth, and what actually happened, reality, see? Because we now know that large portions of the earth at that time were literally laid waste. Because what really brought that home was the work of dendrochronologists who looked at trees, particular trees in Europe and in North America, and you could actually see from the thickness of the tree rings that forest growth over the northern hemisphere appears to have almost come to a stop for about 10 years. So it follows that if you go through the unavoidable logic of what that meant in terms of practical, in terms of like the landscapes around you, literally, yeah, large areas of the Earth's surface were laid waste. And so now we have these stories of this Grail quest surrounding Arthur and the knights and this whole quest story for the Grail and everything that's wrapped up and associated with the Grail. We now see that story, the setting of that story has its roots right in something that we now know actually was a time of deprivation, a time of trauma for many people around the world. We recovered from that, but in order to affect that recovery, the cold and the dark, the literal darkness of the time has to been attributed, in my mind, to some increased opacity of the atmosphere. Something has caused a veiling of the atmosphere, and I think we can point to two major culprits pretty readily. One from inside and one from outside. We have volcanoes going off, probably have a period of enhanced volcanic activity. We also are probably coinciding with enhanced activity of accretion of cosmic material, both in the form of macroscopic stuff and in dust. Also, the variability of the sun. If you start combining some of these things, like we're going through a solar minimum at the same time that there's intense volcanism, that's a recipe for a little ice age. And we see that when we go back to the Gothic cathedrals, that they came to an end, that whole enterprise came to an end with the turning of the climate. Climate went cold in the 1300s, and that was the collapse of the whole building era in Europe, and that was when Freemasonry made its transition from operative to speculative. Because
I think it's amazing and something to be considered. Like, we're taught this idea that like mankind has progressed intellectually, linearly. Like we're smarter now than we've been. Like this is like this story that we're told. But I don't know if we could recreate those cathedrals now. Like I think it's impossible for us to remake those.
Oh, it is, and those cathedrals were the expression of their time. And they, so many of them have endured, and that's why they're so powerful, because they were imbued with symbolical meaning. And that symbolical meaning is incredibly deep, it's incredibly sophisticated and nuanced, and has amazing implications to it. And these cathedrals are literally textbooks in stone. And what is being described in these textbooks, I think, is an ancient science, a lost science. And it has, in some way or another, in some mysterious, almost miraculous way, some aspect of an ancient lost science was revived during the Middle Ages. And somehow this revival that took place in the early Middle Ages, like we'd say, it has a symbolical historical event that pretty much correlates, and that's the journey of the Templars, the original 9 Templars, from France to the Holy Land in quest of what, and then returning after. So in 1118, Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, who was the founder of the Cistercian order, sent this contingent of 9 knights to Jerusalem, and they spent basically a decade there. They when they got there, they presented themselves to King Baldwin and told the king that we're here to protect pilgrims coming, make the Christian pilgrims coming from Europe against the brigands and you probably know the story. Shortly thereafter, Baldwin leaves and goes off into crusades, and I don't think he ever comes back. So he leaves his castle and the wing, which had been the location of Solomon's temple here. This is in Jerusalem. So what did the Templars do? They spend a decade apparently exploring and excavating in the vast subterranean stables that housed the, Solomon's her horses and so on. So after this period of time, there's no real record of them policing the highways, but they returned 10 years later in the year 1128. And there was this big conference there, probably in Citeaux, I think it was, presided over Bernard. So Bernard was a key character in this whole thing. And if we could understand who he was and what his motivation was, I think that would be the first step in trying to get to the bottom of this whole thing, the whole phenomena. But so they came back in 1128 and 1130. The cornerstone was laid for the first high Gothic cathedral in the Notre Dame at St. Denis. And then within the next 10 years to 20 years, suddenly all over Europe, these things are coming up out of the ground. Now, and you have now 5 generations working on them, as long as the state of the world allowed them to do it. They made hay while the sun shined. And then when the climate shifted, and that's why a lot of the cathedrals almost looked like they got close to being finished, and then boom, they're not quite finished. There's a bunch of them, like where the towers weren't quite finished, and we understand now why.
What's so cool to me about experiencing, and I say experiencing because like when you go to one of these cathedrals, now I've not been to these in Europe, but I've entered cathedrals, and it is an experience. Like even if you don't know how to analyze logically the art that's taking place, it speaks to something subconscious in you as a human being. And you don't even have to, it's like you're born to experience this language of geometry is at the fundamental of it, of the ornamentations. Like there's something about it. You could know absolutely nothing about architecture, nothing about the design, nothing about geometry. And you sit in one of these cathedrals with an open mind and an open heart, and it changes you.
It speaks to you. The cathedral speaks to you. Yes.
Yeah. It conveys values, and it lifts you up. It's like a psychedelic experience in a way. It's amazing, really, like how these things interact with the human mind and inspire us. And I think it's tragic how like now we're building things that are totally uninspiring, and it's like this like atheistic architecture that we have now, which is like it's not drawing us to anything. It's not like connecting to any part of our soul. It's crushing us.
Well, we're going to see an example here of here we go. Thank you, Mike. I thought since we're talking about Chartres, we're talking about cathedrals, let's look at Chartres here.
Amazing.
It is amazing. Oh, totally, 100%. It's amazing. And the whole facade here, it's basically like it's like the first page. It's like the cover of a book, but whoever designed this book put the story, the symbolical representation of the content of that book represented on its cover, and that's what we're seeing here. And there's a couple of things to call your attention to. You see, there's 2 towers, and they're different, right? Well, the one on the left is the solar tower, and I'm sorry that this particular image clips the top here, so you don't see that there's a great solar orb on the top of this tower up here. Are we seeing let me see, there we go. Are you seeing my cursor?
Yeah.
Up here. Over here, and again, that we'd have to have an image zoomed in, is the crescent moon. The moon in the shape of the arc, is up there. So you've got a lunar tower, and you've got a solar tower. And the whole monument itself is built on a mound that has millennia of sanctity preceding the construction of the cathedral. In fact, there was a sacred spring there, which is something we always find associated with sacred structures and sacred spaces, is the presence, oftentimes, way more often than not, the presence of a spring. The 3 doors are very interesting and significant, and to go into some of the deeper meaning of the facade here would be beyond what we're going to be talking about here tonight. But we're going to zoom in. I think this is the one that I've got here. And up here, I want you to take note of the great rose window.
Yeah.
And there's a like a flowering feature here. Now, again, when you zoom in on this and you look at it, it's all stone and glass, carved stone with inlaid glass. So there's 12 petals, and those 12 petals symbolize the 12 cosmic months, or the 12 secular months that we associate with the year. But it also represents the 12 signs of the zodiac. Even though it's not explicitly presented as such, it absolutely has this astronomical correlation. Let's see if we can zoom in on the entryway down here a little closer. Let's see, am I going the right way here? Yes. Okay, we'll do that. We'll come right back to it. And you'll understand why we're looking at this particular slide now, because this is kind of a theme I think that we're kind of, kind of emerging into here as our conversation proceeds. So here, this is the cover of the Chalice Well, Glastonbury, England. Now, what do you think chalice this is referring to? Obviously, the same one we've just been talking about, the Grail. And what's interesting about this is that the cover to the Chalice Well, and see, again, here you have the presence. This was a very sacred spot right here, and considered to be one of the resting places of the Grail. And what do we find there? Well, consistent what we know from the universality of other sacred places is this presence of the spring. And lo and behold, at Glastonbury is the presence of the spring. And this well that feeds into the spring is called the Chalice Well.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So the spring thing is interesting to me. Do you think that signifies sacred space just because of like human being, like that's one of our first like necessities is like water. You're like, we need water, or do you believe that like there is some sort of like energetic thing that's taking place at that point in the earth?
I think both, clearly both. And one sort of re-amplifies the significance of the other. Yeah, because water is such an essential thing for life, but then it also is a conveyor of, yes, I think absolutely water is a conveyor of some kind of an energy and some type of a subtle energy that has been recognized and named by cultures throughout history. And whatever this is that manifests itself with moving water particularly, seems to manifest at certain places. And it's likely that it has it likely has this interaction between water and stone, because the water is moving through, water coming up to a spring has been moving through bedrock. So the water moving through the rock picks up characteristics from the rock, even I think subtly, but also, in the sense of picking up sediment and minerals from the rock, and is then endowed with the properties of, oftentimes electromagnetic properties of the minerals that are being carried within the moving water. The water will move along fractures and cracks within the bedrock. It'll also move along fault lines. Now, the difference between a fault line and a regular crack, which we call a fracture, is that a fracture is just a crack with two static masses of rock together. But a fault line is a different thing altogether, because in a fault line you have movement. See, when you have movement along those two adjoining plates of rock, and then oftentimes water, see, because of that movement, you now have increased, you've pulverized, and you've created fine-grained mineral content, and the water moving through that fault line under pressure. And then we won't get into the whole geological end of it, but there's definitely a process going on there. And in this image that you see here, it's interesting that the presence of the well would then be considered the locus of where this field of energy that's associated with the movement of the subterranean waters, that is the point, would be the locus of this pattern of energy in the landscape, this geomantic pattern, if you will.
Yeah.
So right at this spot, we have the lid, and what do we see on the lid?
Vesica Pisces.
We see the vesica, which is the first really fundamental act in geometry. And if you can think of it as one circle bifurcating, duplicating itself, and splitting apart, and then pausing at this very, very auspicious overlay between them, where the distance between the center of each circle and the circumference of the other is consistent. So, in other words, if you look at this, you've got 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3. Oops, up here. 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3. And this overlap gives us the secret. This is it. Just right here. It's displayed the secret. This is the entrance, the doorway into the majestic realm of geometry. Because once you've created these two circles, which of course is very easy to do, really all you need is if you've got some string or a rope and a stick and you put the stick in the ground, you can draw circles, right? It's easy to do. Or you use one of these instruments, compasses that we use in the sacred geometry courses and classes to draw circles. So it's easy to draw circles, on the ground. So, back up. So from this, now we see that we've got this line, this axis that crosses this fish lake. Now this is, of course, the origin. You said the Vesica Pisces, or also Vesica Piscis, the vessel of the fish. And if you take this vesica here, which is this lozenge shape here, turn it on its side, and you adorn it with a tail fin and a couple of eyes, and a fin. Well, you got ichthys. Ichthys is the prominent symbol in early Christianity, and it's a time which was the transit of the vernal equinox from Aries into the era of the ram into Pisces, the era of the fish. And the founders of Christianity knew this, that there was this cosmological association between what's happening up there in the heavens above and what's happening down here below, which of course is right there. The reason what's happening down below is because of changes in the cosmic environment. The reason it went cold for 10 years and forest growth stopped in the northern hemisphere from 536 to the mid-540s was because something happened out there. And it translated into effects reverberating down here below. Now, if we look back here at this symbol, we've got the line of centers. And this is the first thing. This is in the sacred geometry workshop. This is how it's through this particular configuration that we enter into the realm of sacred geometry. And you think of this as a portal, a doorway into this realm, see? Now, if I draw a line from the intersections of the circles, it's going to give me a perpendicular, right? I've got the line of centers. I draw this line, vertical line. I've got a perpendicular. So I've shown a very simple way of setting up two perpendicular lines. But more than that, if I draw from the circle, the intersection of the two circles, down here to the centers, I get an equilateral triangle. And so with this one act, I get the right angle with all of its inherent properties and powers, and I get the 60-degree equilateral triangle with all of its inherent properties and powers, right? Now, from that, I build the whole edifice of geometry. Now, what is geometry the foundation of? All other mathematics.
I think what's amazing about like what we're looking at here, and this being like the introduction to sacred geometry, is like this is so pure and simple. We're dealing with points, straight lines, and curved lines. And like, at least for me, like when I went through the workshop 2 years ago, like modern life is like, we got all this complicated bullshit going on. To just have an experience where you're learning about something so simple yet so profound is it's like extremely meditative and like really changes your perspective when you really dive into some of this stuff.
Well, it is. I mean, when you immersing yourself in the process of creating these shapes and these forms, think about it. It involves hand. You're manipulating your compass and your straight edge.
Yep.
It involves the eye. It involves the mind. So it involves this coordination of hand, eye, and mind. And that is, for me, like the three legs of the stool that you can build a whole worldview upon, both all the way from a material world to a metaphysical world. But ultimately, those three things that are attributes of our incarnation into a human form: the hand,
Yeah.
right? The hand and the eye and the mind. Now let's look at where this is going, because when you see the next slide, here's the entrance to Chartres Cathedral. And you'll notice the doorway, big wooden door down here, and then you've got this up here which is called the tympanum. And what's going on up here in the tympanum? Well, let's zoom in and take a closer look. There's the seated figure of Christ in majesty. He's holding a book in his left hand, and he's raising his right hand in a symbol of benediction. He's using his right hand. His right hand is look at, see, okay, so, and then he's surrounded by these four living things here. And let's look at the living things. Well, before that, let's look at the obvious. What is Christ seated within? The vesica.
Yeah, right there.
Right there, seated within the vesica. The fundamental first act of geometry, which is the creation of this vesica.
I want to know who named it the mystic almond.
I think that comes from the Middle Ages. I do. I think that comes from the Middle Ages. We lost. What happened to? Let's go back. There we go. Okay, so now let's go back to these four creatures here. Yeah. We down on the lower left, we have a winged lion. Over here on the lower right, we have a winged
bull.
Bull. That's right. Up here, well, let's go diagonal across. Here we have an angelic feature, or it could be a human feature. And then over here we have this bird. But what kind of a bird is that?
Like an eagle or a phoenix or something.
Well, it's an eagle. Yes, it's an eagle. Now, what's interesting is that you have the very obvious astrological or astronomical correlations here, in that here we have the lion, which of course is Leo, and here we have the bull, which is Taurus. Here we have the human figure, which is Aquarius, the water bearer, and over here we have the eagle, which is the correlation of Scorpio, because the Aquila, the constellation of the eagle, rises at the same time as the constellation of Scorpio. So in terms of keeping time, these particular four creatures right here mark the four fixed signs of the zodiac. And the four fixed signs of the zodiac, if you were to trace them out into the heavenly vault, they would form a gigantic cross. And because of the shifting of the Earth's axes, that cross is constantly turning and rotating. Now, let's see if I've got it here. Right. So here's your basic third motion of the Earth's surface, of the Earth, and it's taking a period of about a little bit less than 26,000 years for this whole precessional motion, precessional motion, right? But the classical number, the sacred number from ancient times, is 25,920. 25,920 years, which would be precisely the period for one complete cycle of the vernal equinox to completely pass through all 12 signs of the zodiac, and at the rate of 50 seconds of arc, 50 seconds of arc per year, right? And if you divide that into 360, that's where you'll see we come up with the 25,920 years. But just as there was 12 cosmic months, which are the 2,160 years of each astrological age, here I'm talking Taurus to Aries to Pisces to Aquarius, etc., right? That everybody's heard of, but hardly anybody understands. But associated with that, you have seasons. So just as our annual journey of the Earth around the sun has 4 seasons, spring, summer, fall, winter, and each one of them is 1/4. Likewise, the great year, as this has been called, the great year of the Earth, has 6,480 years comprising each season. Hello, friends. I'm Randall Carlson. I'd like to extend an invitation to you to enter the magnificent realm of sacred geometry. I'll be hosting a Sacred Geometry weekend at Beersheba Springs Assembly on the beautiful Cumberland Plateau in Tennessee, this February 28th through March 3rd. This is going to be a hands-on workshop for beginning students and more advanced students who would like a refresher in the basic methods. During the weekend, we're going to cover the fundamentals of this ancient science of harmonious design, while the emphasis will be on the practical applications, tailored to be useful as a tool for architects, designers, artists, builders, musicians, arts and crafts people, such as woodworkers, quilters, stained glass workers, furniture makers, and on, as well as people of a more philosophical orientation who might be looking for a deeper symbolical or even metaphysical meaning in the patterns and relations among the mystic forms and numbers underlying all creation. For those seekers of knowledge, there will be a generous serving of inspiring and thought-provoking information. Included in the weekend, we're going to be taking a field trip to the nearby All Saints Chapel. This is in Sewanee, Tennessee. All Saints Chapel is an extraordinarily beautiful neo-Gothic church whose design is inspired by the geometry and symbolism of the cathedrals of Chartres and Amiens in France. The goal of this workshop retreat will be to prepare students for the more advanced teachings that are going to follow. There's a reason why Pythagoras and Plato held geometry in such high esteem and why the inscription over the entrance to Plato's Academy cautioned, "Let none but geometers enter here." So, from a deeper perspective, what can we say about the advanced teaching and the ultimate meaning and significance of sacred geometry? First, sacred geometry provides the key to revealing the invisible archetypal patterns of creation, and it provides the template upon which the manifest universe is built, both in its inanimate and animate forms. Sacred geometry provides the key to understanding the great year, that is, the cosmic clock which reveals the cycles of planetary change and governs the unfolding of world events. It unlocks the deepest mysteries of cosmic destruction and renewal. And it provided the alphabet with which the master builders of old conceived and constructed their masterpieces of stone and clay and wood. And the master key to unlocking their concealed teachings. It unveils the cosmic blueprint for the building of the worlds and for the new order of the ages. Now, in-person seating is limited, but for all those who cannot attend in person, the event will be live streamed through my HowTube channel. If you purchase a ticket for the live stream, you'll be able to download a recorded copy, which you will then be able to keep and watch in perpetuity. The price of admission includes all the supplies you'll need to participate effectively, including this beautiful handcrafted hardwood drawing compass. So please join us and the growing community of knowledge seekers from around the world, either in-house or remotely, and prepare to embark upon a wondrous journey. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you there.